Welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here, and today we're going to be looking at my 2020 presidential election prediction, filling in all our states, and looking at who will win and try to accurately predict the election about 94 days out from the election, August 1st, 2020. So let's get started by filling in our Democratic safe states. So the Democrats have a major advantage when it comes to their safe states. Not only do they give them a lot more electoral votes just because of the sheer size of these states, but rather they have a solid hold on these states. Compare that to the Republican Party, who has been struggling to hold on to their safe state. Day by day, they're losing some of these states that should have been solidly in the Republican column, and they're going to have to spend some more resources and things like that into those states, which, is just wasting the money they could be using elsewhere. And for that reason, it could be said that the Trump campaign has taken the decision to not invest more money into the state of Michigan and let the Republicans, the Democrats, win there. So, this is our starting off map. So, like I said, the Republican Party has been losing a lot of the states, and quickly. So, that's why you're going to see some solidly Republican states not filled in right now, and I'm going to explain that right now. So, actually, let's get started by filling in our likely Republican states. So, we're going to start by filling in all our likely Republican states, and then I'm going to explain them all. So, Alaska, at this point is pretty likely. Missouri, Mississippi, and South Carolina are all states that have moved into the likely column for the Republican Party. This is good news for the Democrats, as they're able to push down the margins here, which one could help them in the future if they want to get and invest into these states and probably even flip them sometime in the future, whether it be in the near future, like in 2024 or 2028, or in the extended future, like 2040. So, we're going to start by talking about the state of Alaska. So, this state has an interesting dynamic. This state's political system and the way politics run in Alaska has always been weird. Although it's been a solid Republican state in the presidential level, when it comes to state level, there is a lot of Democrats and independents and third parties. So, generally speaking, there is a big anti-Trump movement in the state of Alaska. So, you pretty much have the right-wing GOP along with the right-wing party in Alaska. That's a third party that takes a considerable amount of the vote. And again, doing against pretty much the moderates and everyone else. So, this would be enough, I think, to push in a likely margin for Trump. So, I think it would be anywhere around from 10 to 14%. So, that would be a pretty good margin for them. But I honestly think that this state should have been into the safer column for the Republican Party, and they're going to have to spend a lot more money here, which they should not have to because it's a solid Republican state. So, in the state of Alaska, it's narrowing up and quickly. Now, going on to the state of Missouri, I feel like the state of Missouri is a state that no one barely talks about when they talk about contested states and probably swing states of the future. So the state of Missouri, yes, it does have a somewhat large rural population. Majority of the state is rural areas. But considering the fact that you have two large Democratic bases in St. Louis and Kansas City, I think it should be considered that the state has a possibility of the margins narrowing down. Especially because they have a lot of African-American minorities in the state of Missouri. So right now, the African-American vote and the black vote in general is not looking too good for Donald Trump. I think a lot of the minorities, they're the ones that are losing jobs. They're the ones that are getting hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. And a lot of these people want normalcy and they want to get back on their feet. So, with Trump doing some of these things, and just generally speaking, Republicans in Congress not passing the bills, I think honestly that's going to hurt the Republican Party in a lot of these states. And that's why you're seeing the margins narrow down. And the whole Republican Party is sinking and sinking quickly. So they're going to have to watch out with some of these seats because if they don't realize, they might just give up all the seats and just focus on the Senate races. So going on to the last two seats, Mississippi and South Carolina, these two states are fairly similar just because they're deep South states. So generally speaking, the demographics are pretty similar. There is a large amount of white, college, non-educated vote, along with a big part of the electorate being African-American and black. So, what is the deal here? So, the African-American vote is going to be very high. Although Trump has somewhat been gaining support, the pandemic is just going to bring up the margins for the Democrats. So in these states where usually we see Republicans win by 20 points average, we're now going to see Donald Trump winning by around 10 to 15. And South Carolina is a state that fastly is trending blue, and that is a state that could honestly, anytime in the future, flip towards the Democratic Party. So those are all our Republican likely states. Let's move on to our Democratic likely states. So right now, the Democrats actually have a lot of likely states. So, I mean, this is why I'm saying this map looks amazing for them. They barely have to put any work in to win this election. I mean, at this point in time, they realistically just have to win the states they won in 2016 and take a few from the others. So, right now, the likely states are the state of Nevada, Colorado, Virginia, Minnesota, Michigan, and New Hampshire. So, I'm going to go through and talk about each state. So, out of the state of Nevada and Colorado, I would say they're fairly similar just because the Latino population is such a big part of the electorate here. So, generally speaking, the Latino populations are different everywhere you go. So the population of Latinos in Nevada is completely different to the one in Florida. So, in Nevada and Colorado, we're seeing a very big movement for Democrats. And Donald Trump is not popular here. And if he had any chances of flipping these states from 2016 to 2020, I think those chances have gone completely out the window. Just the fact is that a lot of these communities, especially in Las Vegas, and in Colorado as well, it's a lot of the biggest communities that have been the hardest hit by COVID-19 and its effect. Las Vegas shut down for a couple of months. Las Vegas was one of the biggest economic power cities in the U.S. just because of their tourism industry, and all of that, they're just restarting from scratch, technically speaking, which really hurts a lot of the voters that live there, because they not only some of their lost employment, but the economy when it comes to eating out or going and buying a t-shirt or something like that. All of those effects from a struggling economy are starting to hit areas like Nevada and Colorado. So the Latino vote's going to come out, I believe, for Joe Biden here. And that's really going to help Joe Biden pretty much win there by around, I would say, anywhere from 5 to 10 points, I would say. When it comes to the two states in the Rust Belt, you have Minnesota and Michigan. These two states, I think, are in similar votes. I mean, generally speaking, the Trump campaign hasn't given up in Minnesota, but I'm not sure if they've tried too much. And they came up with, an announcement that they're just giving up on Michigan. So, I mean, right now, the Rust Belt is looking like it's trending a lot more blue. But I think, honestly, these are just going to be states that the Republican Party is just going to have to leave. They have other priorities and other bigger fish to fry. I mean, the Republican Party is going to have to prioritize states. So would they rather invest a lot of money into Texas to hold it, or flip another state and have the possibility of Texas flipping to the Democrats? So those are all things that the Republican Party is going to have to play with. But since the Republican Party has not been trying too much in Michigan or Minnesota when it comes to the presidential election, I think it's pretty safe to say those states will go at least by 5 points, and I wouldn't be surprised if they go anywhere shy of 10 points. So the last two states in the column, Virginia and New Hampshire. So Virginia is an interesting state just because of the suburbs. So the suburbs are in a weird dynamic right now because they've been hard hit by COVID-19. I mean, the whole country has, but they might be voting on something else. So while a lot of majority of the country might be voting for COVID-19, some of these suburban voters might actually be voting on the riots and its effects. So that's another big event that's changing this election. So this situation in Portland and some of these other cities where you have people who are supposedly peaceful protesters, when in fact not all of them are. So some people in the suburbs think that the federal government going in is the right move, so that might give them support. And especially how the Trump campaign has been advertising the abolish the police movement, I think that really appeals to the suburban voter. Nonetheless, I think the Democrats still have a solid hold on the suburbs. I mean, if they do not gain, that wouldn't be surprising just because of how the movement is going. Nonetheless, they're pretty likely to gain. So I would say a state like Virginia go by around 5 to 7 points. And in New Hampshire, it's a similar thing. So the Northeast is an area that, I mean, has become a lot more solidly Democratic over the years. And a state like New Hampshire, I mean, it's trended Democratic for a long time. And there's just a lot of momentum for the Democrats there. and just with the Senate race and other races that are really helping out the Democrats. And in the state of New Hampshire, I guess, right now, they're a state that really likes normalcy, and they're pretty status quo when it comes to a lot of things. So they realistically want to stay the same, and they want normalcy. So I think they really will go on to vote for the Democratic Party when it comes to this presidential election and vote for Joe Biden. So those are all our likely states at this point in time for Joe Biden. Let's move on to our lean states for the Republican Party. So when I say the Republican Party is struggling, I do mean it. So they have some lean states, but it's not a lot, and it's changing quickly. So I would say both of the congressional districts at this point in time are in the lean column for the Republican Party, and I would honestly say that is pretty much it for the Republican Party when it comes to lean states. I think these two districts are just going to stay with the Republican Party just because they're conservative at their base. So in Maine 2nd Congressional District, it's a conservative district. And it's been trending Democratic. I mean, it flipped in the House. But again, it's because you have a specific candidate. I think Donald Trump will be able to narrowly hold on just because COVID-19 wasn't as hard hit in that district. Because it's far north and a lot more rural. So everything's a little bit more distant. So at this point, Donald Trump wouldn't be as hurt there. And when it comes to Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District, I honestly think that if a progressive candidate is not running, Democrats are not winning there. Who are the only Democrats have won there or have led and posed there? You had Barack Obama, somewhat progressive for his time. I mean, he's no longer like part of the progressive movement in the Democratic Party. Now let's move on to the Bernie Sanders. So when Bernie Sanders was being pulled against Trump in Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District, he was leading. And the fact of the matter with his district, it's that it's historically conservative. And it's just because no progressive candidates have gone in and taken a lot of the vote that there is available for them. It's just that they don't turn out. The Democrats here don't turn out. And I think that wouldn't change this election. Nonetheless, I mean, Joe Biden would be able to do it. It's just I don't think he would want to like spend too much money there. So realistically, those are actually lean states for the Republican Party at this time. And the Democrats actually have a lot of lean states. So as of right now, states like Arizona, states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, North Carolina, these states are right now in the lean column for the Democratic Party. These states are changing and changing quickly. I mean, as of right now, we already have a similar scenario to, in electoral count at least, to the 2012 presidential election. And look, these states are states that have been trending blue, and I mean, for the most part, and just because they want to return to normalcy. So let's start with the state of Arizona. The state of Arizona has been hard hit by COVID-19, and they really need to recover. So another thing is that they have a lot of polls that are they're trending blue, and they have Biden ahead by +3, +4 constantly. So I feel like these polls are somewhat right. And the state of Arizona is just going back to normalcy, and they're very moderate. I mean, a lot of the Arizonan voters, they hesitate to vote for Trump just because he is an outsider. In Arizona, they just really like political insiders. So whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, they just like political insiders. So Joe Biden is a good candidate to run in Arizona. And I mean, he's going to be riding off of Mark Kelly's piggyback, where Mark Kelly is doing very good in the Senate race, which will transfer some voters down to the Biden column. So now going on to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So these two states could be said are the closest states in the Rust Belt. If you don't consider Iowa and Ohio part of the Rust Belt, I guess they technically are. But when I talk about the Rust Belt in politics, I'm talking about these four states right here. And honestly, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are interesting. So polling has Biden ahead by 4 points, by 5 points. And I honestly think it's going to be a little bit tighter than that. So I think it's going to be more like 3 to 5 points instead of like 4 to 5 points or 4 to 6 points. And the reason for that being is that although COVID-19 has been a big impact here and the economy is doing atrocious, which really doesn't help since these are places where the economy is what they mostly vote for, honestly, the Republican Party doesn't have much of a chance. But they have going for them is that growth has started to come back with the economy just as these states are starting to reopen. Well, most of the country is starting to close again. The Rust Belt hasn't been hard hit by the second wave. They've had a second wave of COVID-19, but it's not as big. So those states, I would say, will honestly go right now by around 2 to 5 points, I would say. Anywhere in that margin. I wouldn't say they would go right now as more than a likely margin, but I mean, as things change constantly, and Donald Trump's popularity just keeps on sinking, things honestly can change, and if anything is to tell, this presidential election has been anything but normal. And the last two states, Florida and North Carolina, in the lean column for the Democratic Party, these states, I think, honestly, are moving further and further to the left. And the Republican Party is going to have somewhat of a harder time winning here for a couple of reasons. So, let's start with the state of Florida. So, this is my actually home state. And honestly, Ron DeSantis is hurting the Trump campaign. And quickly. There is voter enthusiasm for Trump in the state of Florida. But there's also a somewhat a big considerable chunk of anti-Trump voters, which really does bring enthusiasm for the Democrats. So, what's going to happen here? I think, honestly, since COVID-19 has been such a hard-hit thing, the economy is going to really shift, and especially when it comes to tourism. And Florida is going to be hard hit just because their tourism industry is one of the biggest ones. So, yeah, that's going to be a problem for them. And just considering off the fact that a lot of these voters that used to work in the tourism industry, they no longer have jobs. There's a big unemployment rate in the state of Florida, which is not good. And polling has Biden ahead by around 3 to 4 points. I think it would be anywhere actually from a little bit less, so 2 to 3 points. And it's just that Donald Trump has a base here. Now, is if the Democrats turn out high, which, I mean, by all means, the election is looking, so that might happen. The only thing I'm a little skeptical here is that support in strong Democratic counties is decreasing. Nonetheless, I mean, support elsewhere might increase. So the Democrats might be able to flip the state of Florida, and by around a big margin. And North Carolina, I think it's just COVID-19 handling that's really going to help out the Democratic Party. You have Roy Cooper, a Democratic governor, and he's actually been praised for his COVID-19 handling in the state of North Carolina. And at this point in time, that's really going to help Joe Biden, if anything. And considering that North Carolina is one of the areas that has fastest tech growth and some of the fastest growing cities because of tech, though that's going to be more votes for the Democrats, as that's like mostly college educated voters. So from North Carolina is moving a lot of people from the West and the North, which really does help the Democrats, as those are areas where they have a lot of support. So North Carolina, it's increasingly turning Democratic, although the Republican Party does have their big base there. So North Carolina is going to be interesting to see what ends up happening. Right now, I would say it falls anywhere between the low lean column, so 2 to 3%. So those are all our lean states, both for the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And let's go on to the last states that we talked about, and those are our states that will be in the tilt column. So as of right now, this is going to be interesting to watch. So I'm going to start by filling our tilt Republican states, and I feel like, honestly, at this point, we have the state of Texas, and we have a state like, I would say at this point, Iowa. I would say that these are the states that right now will be looking like going into the tilt column for the Republican Party. So with Texas, we have Biden leading in polls, but I mean, it's nothing huge. I mean, it's less than 1%. Is it a big, considerable lead? Absolutely. A lead in Texas for a Democrat is impressive. Nonetheless, I mean, there's still other factors. While the race might become the closest it's ever been in modern history, I still be skeptical of calling it for the Democrats at this point in time. Nonetheless, I mean, things are definitely changing. So if polling holds up and starts going up for Biden, I would definitely call this tilt for the Democratic Party. But as of right now, Donald Trump has somewhat of a big base there. Same thing in the state of Iowa, and it's just the rural base. I mean, since everything's a lot more rural here, COVID-19 hasn't been as big of a problem just because of how rural it is. And just speaking off, I mean, you just have the only big minority you have there is the African American vote, which might come out in somewhat large margins in areas like Des Moines or Iowa City. So that's really going to help the Democrats, but it's still, they're going to have to flip 5% of the electorate. So it's going to be somewhat of a tough task for the Biden campaign. They're going to get close, but nonetheless, I don't think they would win. And at this point in time, I would honestly say that Ohio and Georgia are starting to lean a little blue. Or actually, Georgia's actually leaning red. My bad. So Georgia is a state that has been leaning blue. I mean, tilting blue. I mean, when it comes to demographics, it's been leaning for the Democratic Party. They've been gaining a lot of demographics there. And is 2020 the year to flip Georgia? I do not think so. Considering the governors are Republican and known to be a voter suppressionist, I wouldn't put my all the eggs in the Democratic basket in the state of Georgia just because of that. Although it might be like kind of a kind of a nasty way to win, it's still a way to win, I guess. And the Republican Party will probably narrowly edge it out in the state of Georgia with Brian Kemp as governor. Although Brian Kemp as governor also has hurt them in ways that, with COVID-19 handling, I mean, he called everything out way too early, and then, look, they're now having a second wave. So a lot of voters might be frustrated by that. But, I mean, we haven't seen any big polls of Trump leading, of Biden leading here lately. So, I mean, Trump still has held on to his narrow lead, but nonetheless, I think he'll narrowly edge it out. And in Ohio, I think that, honestly, at this point, Biden's going to be able to push it out. Just because the state of Ohio is, it's been historically a swing state, and it actually has some of a large African-American population in areas like Cincinnati and Columbus and Cleveland. So those areas are easily going to be able to vote for the Democratic Party and have similar turnout to what Obama had in 2008 and 2012 when he won the state of Ohio. So right now this map looks very good for the Democratic Party, and believe it or not, it looks somewhat similar to the best case scenario map, only with a couple exceptions. And I think, honestly, if anything, the election is going to be a lot weirder from here on out, because we could go on two tracks. We can go on the track where the Republican Party just keeps on doing a lot of these political gaffes, where they're going to start losing support and rapidly, where we might see states like Texas flip in my prediction, or Georgia or Iowa, and see Maine's and 2nd Congressional District and Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District flip as a whole, and then the states that are unlikely margin move into lean margin. Those things could definitely happen, as well as the Republicans recover from all these things they've been saying and how hard they've been hit. And is that super likely? Maybe not, but I mean, it's going to be given a shot. I think the Republican Party would definitely improve by the time we get to Election Day, but how much is going to be the question that we need to ask ourselves, and will be answered as we go on the road to election. So, right now, my final prediction for this map is 187 electoral votes for the Republicans and 351 for the Democrats. So this is my 2020 presidential election prediction as of August 1st, 2020, 94 days out from the election. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like and subscribe, and turn on post notifications to get notified when I post my next video. I hope you enjoyed the video, and goodbye.